Hi, I'm Maidem Kayem, the youngest of four siblings, born in a small town called Fiango Kumba in the former British Southern Cameroons. I like to consider myself a well-rounded Cameroonian because even though I was born in the former British Southern Cameroons, I grew up in the Adamawa region of the northern part of the Republic of Cameroon. I went to primary school there and then I returned to the former British Southern Cameroons to study in secondary school and high school, Our Lady of Lords Secondary School, Mancon, and St. Augustine's College, So, for my secondary school and high school. And then I went to the Southwest region, to the University of Buea, to read a degree in accounting. And I came full circle when I returned to the University of Ngaoundéré, the town where I grew up, to read a third master's degree in accounting and finance. I am a chartered certified accountant and a certified fraud examiner by profession. Writing is, to me, a second hobby, a second job. When I was a little girl, I always loved writing essays and little stories. And my mother, who is an avid reader and a teacher herself, encouraged me by reading every single piece I wrote. And my father always pretended that he wasn't paying any attention, but he seemed to know everything about the little stories I wrote. So I wrote mainly as a hobby and in my pastime. So far, what led me to come back to writing, to revive this talent of mine, is that in the course of my work as an accountant and an auditor, I do a lot of traveling. So I traveled around Africa. I've been traveling around Africa for the last 13 years of my career. And what I realized in Africa is that as I traveled from country to country, I could almost connect African countries like a spider's web. And so I began to gain an interest in the history of our countries, in the history of our nations, how these nations came to being. I realized that there are a lot of countries in Africa where we had great kingdoms, which are now completely disheveled, forgotten about. When you read our history as African countries, it is told to us in a way that brings shame and disgust. And frankly, the current situation of Africa as it is gives credence to that version of our history. So I began to read history written by African historians about Africa. Unlike before, when I read history written about Africa by Western historians. And as I read this history, I came to understand what Patrice Lumumba meant by Africa shall write her own history. And from the north to the south of the Sahara, it shall be a beautiful history of dignity and pride. So I wanted to write a story that responded to Patrice Lumumba's vision, that tried to emulate what he would have loved to see in his lifetime. I wanted to write a story that told of our struggles, our pain, without dwelling on self-pity, yet told a story of pride and dignity, as Lumumba would have wanted. So that is how I began my writing journey. I'm going to talk about my book, Balumakazi Native, which I wrote and I've published. We just did the book launch on Saturday, 6th of April. And it's a fictional story about African history. The book, Balumakazi Native, touches on every aspect of the African society, whether it's cultural or spiritual or societal, traditional. The reason is that it retells the story of Africa from a fictional perspective, so that I take my readers to where I like to believe it all began, ancient Egypt. I use the well-known historical figure of Amenhotep, who is commonly referred to as the father of monotheism. And from there, I mold a fictional kingdom, which I bring down to some place in sub-Saharan Africa. and I retell their story. They saw the slave trade, how they fought against it, how they saw the colonialism, how they fought against it, and their struggle for independence. This book speaks to every African people because it cannot be pegged to a particular African tribe or African nation. I like to call it a book about Africa from the African perspective.